I mean, certainly if there's, for example, I see, Palestinian children being kept in administrative detention, children as young as 12. And, for example, anti-Zionist rabbis who are killed or assassinated or taken away by the Israeli death squad and the IDF, and certainly the Israeli intelligence. Is there no legal avenue or ambit? Because they always present this, all their propaganda spokespeople say, we're the open democracy, we're the only democracy in the Middle East. Is there no legal avenue for anyone to, for example, pursue to the police or to the courts or anything along that line?
Well, it's extremely hard. First of all, because of course they're police, and it's all a farce. Their courts and everything is one a big farce, and they're in support of them. And we did report many times Jewish people went and they complained to the human rights groups and so forth. But they're very, very careful in their approach. How they attack the Jewish community, because they are very careful that there should not be anything blatantly. They use, for instance, they won't use sometimes when they want to have a vicious attack on the Jewish community, they'll use the Bedouins or something. They'll use another community. They use their soldiers, so it shouldn't be blatant that it was the Jewish soldiers who did it, and on and on. They have all different systems, but at the end of the day, the Jewish community is totally and bitterly oppressed for over 76 years, because we will never accept their occupation. As the chief rabbi in 1947, before they made the state, he pleaded with the United Nations, and I carry that along with us. Again, nothing with the Israeli rabbinate, which is just another window dressing of the state, but the real rabbinates that are there, which was led in first was Rabbi Sonnenfeld, who I showed you before in the 1920s. And then it's Rabbi, he passed on, Rabbi Dushinsky, of blessed memory, and he pleaded with the United Nations in 1947. They sent a delegation to Jerusalem to ask about creating a Jewish state. And he said, we furthermore wish to express our definite opposition to a Jewish state in any part of Palestine. This is declaration before the United Nations, July 16th, 1947. This was the view of the Jewish community that continued. He passed on. We had other rabbis. Here you see they're taking up of another chief rabbi. Tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands. These are the communities that are there. Or the communities in the United States. This is in front of the White House. The very religious Jew can never accept Zionism or their state. And getting back to Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, these people are what they call from the settlers. What is the settlers? The settlers is a movement. There was a group when they made this Zionism. Theodor Herzl, Ben Gurion, Jabotinsky, who detested religion. Then they got a group called religious Zionists called Mizrahi. These were all almost to each one. They were people who came. They were very modern religious. They call. What does modern religious mean? It means it's a euphemism for a compromised religion. They do not go modestly dressed properly. Their kosher is questionable. Their schooling is a watered down Jewish teaching. And these are the ones, Mizrahi, who are the ones who are the mouthpiece of the religious Zionists, and they're the ones who gathered together students from universities through Hillel and through these Zionist organizations, and they walk around talking with emotions about God gave us the land, and now we have the right to it, but God is returning the land to us, totally ignoring the authorities of Judaism, totally ignoring the whole concept of what Jews accepted and respected for 2,000 years. This is what the religious, and these people who come either from non-religious homes or marginally religious, they call modern religious, they're the ones who make up the settlers, and you can go there. It's very, a religious person, when they just had, let's say, the march, the Independence Day parade in Manhattan, yeah. Or you will go to Canada. I was in Canada now just this last weekend, and they made their march. You watch and you'll see, with a discerning eye, you'll see. You won't find the very religious there. What do you find? You find non-religious and girls singing, which is forbidden for girls to sing in front of men. You will find dressed totally immodestly, everything against God, that's according to Judaism against God. and there you will find, then you will find this some people covering their heads with yarmulkes, kippas, but you'll even see the way they cover their heads. You see, it's not like the regular religious communities. These are what the ones who are incorporated, that joined the Zionists. So even though it was totally forbidden, but they decided to sort of, like I say, sort of weld together and use religion together with Zionism, even though it's non-kosher, but they're trying to make this worm kosher, so that we would call it like a pig with a golden ring in his nose. That's the rabbi's use for it. That's what it is. It's a pig with a golden ring in his nose. They take.
I want to share one individual that you speak about, similar to what you're basically explaining. It's this character here that has been responsible for a lot of the Israeli Hasbara. This chap called Yossi Landau from an organization called Zaka. And I mean, he calls himself, like you said, an ultra-Orthodox religious Jew. But he was one of the individual extremists, Zionists, you can call him, for concocting some of Israel's worst atrocity propaganda about October 7th. Yossi Landau of the group Zaka conceded, however, in an interview with Al Jazeera's investigative unit, that the dead bodies he claimed to have seen in Kibbutz Be'eri were not children. And then eventually he went on to concede that, and it's been discovered, and certainly even the Haaretz and other papers, that Israel burnt their own civilians on October 7th when they invoked what is called the Hannibal Directive. My question is, how has Israel been so successful in atrocity propaganda for so many decades? And in particular on this instance, because it was their atrocity propaganda, that the beheaded babies and the mass rapes and the burning and all of that, which has now been totally collapsed. But that was the initial basis for basically justifying the genocide. I mean, even Netanyahu, for example, he told the US President Biden about beheaded babies. Biden said that he saw the beheaded babies, but there were no photos. My question is, there were no executions taking place. There were certainly killings, and there were certainly shootings that occurred, but nothing on the scale that the extremists, both on the far right in the administration, and people like this guy here, Zaka's leader, Yossi Landau, whose own founder was a sexual molester. Nothing on that particular scale. How have they been so successful in their propaganda? And do you know anything much about this individual here and the organization called Zaka?
Well, with the help of the Almighty, I always used to like that just we should step back and remember the United Nations was formed simply for one reason. We had gone through World War I and World War II, and there was millions and millions of people around the world murdered, and they decided there has to be a world body in order to adjudicate, in order to when there is a dispute amongst nations, instead of that there should be a mass killing field. We should be able to, through peaceful methods, bring peace to the world. Yes, and they gathered together. From each nation was to send wise people, distinguished representatives, in order to be able to create this United Nations, and they did that. And one of the first things they did was to ratify the State of Israel. Now let us understand, the State of Israel was formed in a land where the majority people were Muslim. Nobody could question the fact that the majority were Muslim. The second largest community was Christian. The third was the Jewish community. Now let's put the Jewish community on the side for a second. Imagine they're going to now declare a Jewish state that should be in control over the land where the majority of the people are Muslims. What is that going to bring, if not bloodshed, if not contention, if not hard feelings? This is the body that was created, that there should be a peaceful solution to world problems, and this is one of the first things that they went and did. Now, added to that, by the way, the Jewish community that was living there for hundreds of years was together with the others, as I showed Rabbi Dushinsky said, we don't want the Jewish state in any part of Palestine. Yet they went and they created this state of Israel. So you see that something is wrong here. This is defying common sense, common logic, And they went and they created. We say the answer is it's satanic. It was the works of Satan that God gave the powers through every generation. There is always some, terrible, terrible crimes that are committed. And we don't understand why, God allows the Satan to do what he does. But it's only satanic to explain why the world ratified a state of Israel in a land that was the majority Muslims, as I say, and that the bodies of people living there for hundreds of years, nobody wanted it. Now, going further, since that day, 76 years, there has been bloodshed, suffering, and every time the Zionists come with this narrative that the ones who are opposing, they're occupying the land, it's because they hate Jews. Something that the history shows that we live together in peace and harmony. So again, it's defying common sense and logic, and yet we're watching people suffering. We're watching Jewish people being beaten for 76 years, the community that was living in Palestine, and the world again is silent about that issue. Why is this all happening? So we can only say that, although people who don't believe in God and Satan, these concepts, will laugh at this, but that is the fact. It's something that defies any common logic, any common sense that God gave to a human being, why they should be able to run rampant, that should be created and run rampant for 76 years. Now, in the advent of what's happening in Gaza, we have found the culmination of this evil to the degree that every human being is watching it on their cell phones, on their smartphones, on their whatever, on the different ways that they're watching it in live, how people are suffering and crying and so, and still it is over 7 months that people are dying mass and over 100,000 people that are injured. It's just beyond words. Yet the world is still allowing this to go on, and they're buying into, to a certain degree, the Zionist narrative. You're asking, how could the world accept the Zionist narrative? So I say it's really, truthfully, it's beyond logic. But it could only be satanic because it's an insult to human comprehension, to human logic, to human common sense, to stand by and say this is acceptable, and it's all into the Zionist narrative. It's claiming that the people of Palestine are simply evil and they're anti-Semitic. They're ignoring the facts on the ground that we live together. They're ignoring the suffering of the people of Palestine. They're ignoring the fact that if one person is a mass murderer and runs into a schoolyard, we have 10,000 people. Which law internationally, which human rights law around the world would permit them to throw a bomb on the schoolyard where you have, and it was done once, it would be one thing, but it's done day in and day out, day in and day out. Hospitals, and this is all, the world is not doing anything about it. They're complacent or assisting. So we are finding that it could only, the word to explain this away is satanic. It's satanic. But people who are not ensnared in Satan's tentacles must speak up. We must speak up. We dare not be silent, and we will do just like with God's help by the apartheid. Eventually, the hands of the politicians will be forced to stand up and say enough. The Zionist narrative of 76 years of explaining that the Palestinians are inhumane and they're anti-Semitic, that is a vulgar, reprehensible, unacceptable narrative, and that the real narrative is that a movement started 76 years ago, actually over 100 years ago, 107 years ago with the Balfour Declaration. That is a flawed, selfish political movement. Remove it, extract it from that beautiful fabric of the Holy Land, and we'll be able to coexist again. It will come to that eventually. We don't know when, but we have to stand up and speak up. That's all I can think to tell you. It is satanic. And again, Ben Gvir, remember, these are settlers. You're always seeing these settlers that look like they're Orthodox. They call themselves ultra-Orthodox because they're in the front, because they're in the front line. But they don't represent the majority, the very religious communities around the world that are true to Torah. Not everybody from our communities is outspoken like we are, because there's such vicious attacks from the Zionists in our Palestine is out of the question that they get beaten, arrested, and murdered. But even around the world, we get death threats. We get
Have you received death threats? Because I remember some
Certainly.
years back when you went to South Africa, you alluded to something. Have you and your organization of ultra Orthodox, have you received death threats from the Zionists?
Constantly, us, our families.
So they threaten to kill you, assassinate your family, kidnap you,
Certainly.
all of that.
All the time. This is something that has been ongoing, and that's why that silences people from being outspoken. Even though the chief rabbi of Palestine, Rabbi Teitelbaum, who, by the way, he was in the 1950s and 1960s and 1970s, he moved out of Palestine. He moved to New York, and he urged his followers, if they could possibly leave and get the visas, which is very hard, that they should move, to Jewish communities in Canada and England and the US. And tens of thousands moved out because of his urging. He said, when you're being there, you don't know how you're giving them support and how you're gaining support from them. So he urged people to leave, and many, many people tried to leave and left. But the rest who are there are fighting from within. And not everybody, as I say, can be outspoken. And if in the United States or throughout